Hello, how are you all doing? Well, pretty good. Everyone's had a cake pop, I guess. All right, again, my name is Jennifer Wong, and I'm here to present Becoming a Manager Somewhere Else here at LeadDev San Francisco. Oh, wait, we're in Oakland. So when I'm not making silly jokes, I usually go by Jen. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an engineering manager at CrowdStrike. I've been there about 2 years. And I got to point out that we're hiring. So if you're interested, come talk to me afterwards. I'm going to be wearing a bright yellow sweater. And so here's me at TeamLab Borderless. I point this out because this is the last conference talk I did. This was back in 2019, so it's been about 3 years. I'm a little rusty, so please give me a break. And just like Melanie yesterday, I'm a big fan of disclaimers. So I want to point out that today I'm going to be telling my own story. Not all of the advice provided in this talk is going to work for you, but I hope that what I provide could potentially work for you. But keep in mind, this is my own story. So on today's agenda, we're going to talk about my origin story and where I came from, my journey and how I got here, and also my present and what it's like being an engineering manager for the first time. So let's get started. I've got all these animated GIFs by an artist named Abby Tan, and she's amazing. She's excited I'm going to be using them. So remember that name. One day she's going to be famous. All right, getting into my origin story. So my career trajectory is all over the place. I started out actually working as a civil engineer. I did geotechnical, I did transportation, I also did straight civil engineering. Got a little bit bored of that, so went in and did my master's degree in mechanical engineering. And then I realized that there aren't a lot of jobs designing roller coasters in New York City. So went back to civil engineering, became a structural engineer. And for anyone who is a fan of F1, this is the Yas Marina Hotel in Abu Dhabi, under construction. I think it was in 2009. This is the first project I worked on as a structural engineer. And to prove it to you, I've got this little demo. Back then, originally, what was supposed to happen was that each of the diamond panels were supposed to be lit up. And because the F1 cars drove around and through part of the hotel, each of the panels was also supposed to move, kind of like the cars were making them flicker. Anyways, that was out of budget, so that didn't happen. All right, so again, I kind of got a little bit bored doing that. I realized when you're a civil engineer, projects take years and years and years, and you don't get to see the results of your project until you've become a web developer, for example. So I thought about, what do I want to do now? Well, I wanted to be in an industry that was more fast-paced. So I started to look into tech, and to get my foot in the door, I started in customer support. I thought I wanted to work with people more. It turns out that's not how I wanted to work with people. And so that's why you see a photo here of my coworker, Summer, wearing my headphones. She was a great coworker. But I decided I actually wanted to go back into something a little more technical. So I became a web developer. I'm self-taught, as mentioned earlier, and I did that for about 5 years. And again, started to feel a little bit bored. Are you noticing a pattern here? So I thought, now what? I do want to work with people again, and so I started to think about management. Could I do that? Well, it turned out at that particular company, I couldn't, unfortunately. And so I went back to being a software engineer. You can see me programming here with my cat Fry, as promised. And again, I did that for about another 3 years. And then the pandemic happened. I was part of about a 15% layoff at the company where I worked. And I didn't really know what to do, but then I started to think, maybe I'll go into management. Maybe now is the time to really think about it. And so what did I do to prepare for that potential journey? Well, I played a lot of Animal Crossing. Anyone else Animal Crossing during the pandemic? Yeah, thought so. No, but seriously, I started to think more about what kind of management I wanted to do. I thought maybe I wanted to be a product manager, a technical program manager, or an engineering manager. In other words, I was thinking about some kind of management. And the reason why I thought about this was because I realized over the last 7 or 8 years of being a web developer, I had learned so many frameworks. I went from jQuery, and at that company they went into React. Then I went to work for a company that used Meteor. Then a company that used Backbone that also wanted to use React. And then I went to a company that used Ember, and they went to React. And then AngularJS, because that company's migration to Angular 2 was taking too long. And then they use Ember at CrowdStrike. So at some point, I was just kind of like, all right, I give up. I cannot learn another framework. So that was me kind of thinking on my journey. And before I really get into that journey portion of this talk, I want to acknowledge my privilege. So again, as promised, another disclaimer. So my privilege here. I am a straight, cisgendered woman. I am able-bodied. I am neurotypical. I am college educated. I'm a U.S. citizen, and I'm financially stable. So in other words, my employment is not tied to my ability to stay in this country. And I also point out being financially stable because it took me 6 months to go from the day I got laid off to the first day on my new job. And again, playing a lot of Animal Crossing, that's a big privilege. So this picture is actually me making a little fake wedding because my now husband and I had planned to get married, but of course the pandemic had other plans for us. So we decided to push back the wedding until I realized I needed health insurance. So we got married online. So here's me and Sam, we got married. And I also point out, this is another source of privilege. I was able to literally marry someone to get health insurance. And should I ever become financially unstable, I have someone I can rely on. Additionally, you see my family in the background. Those are people I have the ability to rely on as well. So those are my sources of privilege, and I just want to recognize that before I talk about my journey. All right. So how did I get here, engineering manager up on the stage at LeadDev? Well, to start, again, I was starting to weigh my options. Did I want to go into product, technical, program, or engineering management? And to start on that journey, I decided to have a lot of talks with people. For those of you unfamiliar, this is Khalid. He's got an amazing song called Talk that I recommend checking out after this. I decided to have at least 2 chats per role I was interested in. And the questions that I asked those folks were things like this octopus. What is your job like? What do you do day to day? How is your role different from being an engineer? Because a lot of these folks had transitioned from being engineers. What are the core skills required for this role? What questions have you been asked during interviews? Because, of course, I was preparing to go into interviews. And then what questions do you ask during interviews? What things do you want to know about the company and your team before you go work somewhere else? And out of those conversations, I created a whole list of interview resources. So what you see here is a bunch of my Evernotes of conversations that I had from July to October. I took a lot of notes during those chats. You can't tell from this screenshot, but each of these notes is something like 5 paragraphs long. And each person gave me a lot of insight into both their current role and what interviews for those roles are like. Some of my favorite quotes. Alice is a technical program manager. I think you can tell by this quote. Process is a means to an end. Don is a product manager. Any product managers out there? I know we've got a few. I talked to them earlier. But he said, everyone has an opinion on product. Everyone thinks that they have a sense of it, and it's just something you have to deal with as a product manager, which sounds terrible to me, honestly. And then lastly, Puneet is an engineering manager, and he said that every engineering manager interview is different. They're quite unpredictable, and you really have to be prepared for a whole swath of different things. And some of the things that I learned in those conversations with folks, I, of course, started writing down. But one of the things you want to do is write your own questions. In other words, think about what questions people are going to ask you in these interviews, especially if you've never done this role before. Pull from the conversations that you've had with others. Pull from any interviews you've already had. And ensure that you have multiple concrete examples for your answers to these questions, because they may ask you a follow-up to the question that they just asked. And reuse examples if necessary. Not everyone is going to have an individual example for every question. Also consider both positive and negative experiences. And in those negative experiences, make sure you focus on the things that you've learned and how you apply those learnings and knowledge in the future. Lastly, I want to point out that you can drive the interview. So make sure you ask your own questions so you can attain the information you need. In other words, like Jennifer, different Jennifer, not me, said, she said, I'm going to run this interview for them. So drive that interview. Make sure that you tell your own story and you emphasize the things that you want to emphasize in an interview. I just want to do a quick thank you to a bunch of folks who had conversations with me over this period, because I learned so much from them, and each of them took about an hour to talk to me, and it was amazing. I quickly learned that I would be a terrible product manager. So here on the left, you see my product manager. We've both filled out personality tests. And then me on the right. You can see we overlap a lot, but then if you look a little closer on risk and certainty, apparently product managers are all about risk, and I am not. So product management's not for me. The next step I took in this journey was to start gathering information. So I started to document my own skills. I started to write resumes. I did a lot about thinking about what skills I had that I could emphasize in those interviews as well. So a quote from myself is document, 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 which means that you should be documenting things now. So making sure that you're writing down the things that you're working on now and keeping track of those projects that are important to you. Documenting things always. So just continue to do that documentation, because you never know when you're going to need it. And lastly, do not lose that document. Do not store it on your work computer, because you never know when you would lose access to it. So what I actually created was a super long list of my own projects. And in each of these projects, I talked about what company it was for, the list of team members that was on that project, the timeline, both the proposed and the actual timeline, success metrics of the project, and if they were attained, any difficulties that were faced in the project, as well as especially those that were unpredicted, and then my own involvement in that project, and especially my impact due to that involvement. So I'm going to quickly give you one project example, which is from a previous company. It's going to be a little boring because I can't be super specific about it. So this project was to improve the performance of what was called the members page at that time. So in terms of people, we had 3 back-end, 2 front-end engineers, 1 designer, a product manager, and a support engineer. In terms of the timeline, this one was special because it actually had multiple timelines dependent on the solution that we went with. And also we provided both a short-term and long-term preferred solution. So do you want this solution quickly, or do you want it to take a little more time and be more of a long-term quality solution? And then the success metrics. Our goal was to have the time to load be halved, and also to have API response time improvements without the use of the third-party tooling that we had. And then some extras that I really wanted to emphasize that were related to my own impact. This project was a super vague project. It grew out of 1 ticket. So I spent a lot of time defining the requirements myself. I actually was the person who brought all the teams together, including, as mentioned, some of the folks on the support team. And then I also provided a summary of all the potential solutions. So I think we had something like 6 potential solutions. Again, it's proprietary information, so it's like kind of off to the right. But essentially for each of the solutions, I listed out the work that would be to be done at a very high level for both front-end and back-end engineers, the pros of the solution and the cons of the solution, and then any open questions that we have that would actually inform that solution. So these are the things that I was kind of recording for myself in order to be able to sell myself as a potential engineering manager. The next thing I did was I put myself into a box, just like my cat who loves to put himself into boxes. And by that I mean that I started to categorize the skills that I had. So I started by looking into the jobs I was interested in and put together a category of technical program manager skills. So business analysis, communication, documentation, process, unblocking. And then for engineering management, I sent consensus building, documentation, hiring and recruiting, leadership, project management, and strategy and roadmap. And then for product management, I just kind of gave up. I knew I was not going to be a product manager. But in doing so and thinking about all of these skills, another quote from Jennifer T came to mind. She said to embrace the questions, am I what this company is looking for? And even if I am, do I agree with what they're looking for? Is that the right person for that role? I just want to point this out because you have to remember that you have power in this interview process. And everything that you say to them is a reflection of that power. The next thing that I did was I started writing resumes. And I don't know how many of you can say that you have like 5 resumes for every year for the past 6 years, but anyone? 30 resumes in the past 6 years? I see one person nodding over here. It's just the 2 of us. So you can see, yeah, I've got folders for every year of resumes. And what I have here is a resume, a standard resume, a manager resume, a product manager resume, a product manager, technical program manager resume, and then I have a very special resume for 18F. Are you all familiar with 18F? All right, a couple people are. So for those of you who are not, it is a consultancy that lives within the federal government. And for any of you who have applied for a federal government job, you have to go like way back in time to see what your employment history is like. So I've been working since I was 14. So I've got my camp counselor role, my file clerk role for the summer in this very special 18F resume, which is 6 pages long. And in writing all of those resumes, I spent a lot of time thinking about job listings and looking at them, wondering, do I have that skill? And if I don't, how can I acquire that skill? So here's a job listing, the one that I actually applied to at CrowdStrike. It's a lot of text, so please don't read it. I'm going to point out a couple of small things. So this is how I used to look at job listings. So here I saw the section, what will you be doing? I'm going to lean in a little bit so I can read this. So here it said, you'll be managing a team workload, project resourcing, and coordination in a fast-paced, highly distributed environment. And when I looked at that, I gave it a skill categorization. I said, this looks like resourcing and remote work. Well, as a non-manager, I didn't really have a lot of experiences in resourcing. But I did have experience with remote work because I worked somewhere where we had many folks across the country. We worked with another office in another country as well. So I really tried to emphasize my ability to work remotely. And then one other piece I wanted to point out is this bullet point says that you'll be supporting the well-being of your team members, providing support and guidance focused primarily on resourcing, progress, and soft skills. You'll also gather feedback from others, provide coaching as needed, and in collaboration with senior engineers to advance team member skill sets. And when I read that one, to me it seemed like leadership and communication, and then consensus building. So again, leadership wasn't something I really had a ton of experience in, but communication and consensus building, that was something I had done in that project that I mentioned earlier. So this is how I read through job listings. And then in doing so, this is how I build a resume. So here on the left, you see my engineering manager resume. On the right, you see product manager resume. Again, it's a lot of text. Please don't read it. I'll point out a couple of key highlights. The first one is on the engineering manager side, you'll see that I referred and interviewed over a dozen candidates. And that was in about a year's worth of tenure, so about one candidate every month. And then I also helped shape interview process for the front-end candidates. So this, for me, is emphasizing hiring and recruiting. And you see it doesn't appear on the product manager side. So customizing those resumes for the role you're applying for. The next section here, I talk about how I started and managed a project for internal application performance assessment and tracking using Honeycomb and Segment across the entire engineering team. And I say the same thing on the product manager side, but on the engineering manager side, I'm actually emphasizing both consensus and documentation. And on the product manager side, I add on a little bit. I say that I actually wrote out a long-term roadmap and strategy as well. So on the product manager side, I'm emphasizing strategy. Next is a little project where I built out user interfaces and front-end functionality for enterprise permissions for groups, spaces, and connections. And on the engineering manager side, I'm trying to emphasize my technical expertise. So building out the front end, doing the coding. On the product manager side, I also said that I experimented iteratively with features using Launch Darkly and helped prioritize scope to maintain timelines. So on the product manager side, I'm actually emphasizing process. And then lastly, on the product manager side, what I point out is that I actually ran an entire survey for the front-end engineering team to figure out what linting rules we wanted to use. So again, on that side, I'm emphasizing consensus, communication, and research. So I wrote all of these things out, and actually in writing this talk, I kind of realized actually all the skills that I listed are necessary for engineering management. So I say this is from future gen, but it's actually from me, present gen, the engineering manager. And I just kind of like mashed up all of those skill sets together. I really do think that they're all needed, and there's a whole like swath of intersections between all of these roles. I point this out because I don't want you all to be afraid of lathering, rinsing, and repeating. In other words, don't be afraid of adjusting your process while you're applying for roles. Each new piece of information provides you with an entirely new insight, just like this bird with the binoculars. All right, now I'll talk about gaining the skills. So for me, honestly, it was too late. I had been laid off, I wasn't working. But for you, it's not. So some advice here. Ask for the roles and the projects that emphasize the skills that you don't yet have. Make sure you work with your manager, though. Ask them what skill you should learn and why for the role that you want. Ask to be the tech lead of that next big project. Or ask for some training to get you there. And then don't forget to check in regularly. But also have patience because opportunities aren't always going to be immediately available. Or don't ask for permission. Ask for forgiveness. Become a Scrum Master. I did that. I became a Scrum Master and started running Scrum processes for my team without asking. Lead that guild. I led an accessibility guild with one of my coworkers, actually 2 different coworkers at 2 different companies, one of who's here. Mentor that stranger. So as a person who transitioned into the role of web developer, a lot of people ask me how I did that. And I spend a lot of time talking them through that. Also what it's like to actually transition into tech itself. Update interview processes and write the docs. Again, something I did. I thought that we could really improve interview processes to make them more equitable, and I wrote all of the docs around it. Build consensus by asking the right questions. So again, kind of similar to running that front-end engineering survey to get a sense of what our linting rules should be like. Shape that ineffective meeting. You see a meeting without an agenda? Put an agenda on it. Be the host. You can do it. Until someone tells you to stop. All right, really quickly, I'm going to talk about what the interviews were like. So again, I was interviewing for all different types of roles, and none of them were consistent. These interviews were all over the place. I did a lot of cheerleading for myself during those interviews. I've done an architectural design interview, technical engineering interviews, peer manager screens. I had to run a fake one-on-one with someone. I had a singular chat with a CEO for a product manager role. And also I've done a ton of cultural interviews with folks from other functions. Honestly, I didn't have too many, but from each of them, I did spend a ton of time writing the docs, which I highly recommend. Keep track of the interview questions that you get, and then take them home and answer them later. But of course, make sure you tell the interviewers I'm taking notes on the side. And yeah, that's the end of my journey. And I would love to just emphasize that if I can do it, you can too. And let's get moving. So what is my present like? Well, I want to take a second to celebrate. I did it. I'm an engineering manager now. I started as an engineering manager at CrowdStrike on December 7th, so my 2-year anniversary is coming up, and I wanted to fake that I'm celebrating with sparklers, but this is actually from New Year's. So first I'm going to talk about the cons, some of the cons of being an engineering manager. You might be like this little cat. There's no such thing as a typical day, as my manager likes to say. Someone asked what a typical day is like as an engineering manager at CrowdStrike, and he said, honestly, there is no typical day. There's many types of typical days, though. It's difficult to measure your own success, or much more difficult than when you're an IC. The way you measure your own success is not just on what you're doing, but it's also on what your team is doing and how they're growing. You do a lot of context switching. And you might get dropped into a trouble team, which maybe has just recently happened to me. And also you'll get many more gray hairs. My grandma pointed out my gray hairs, and it was kind of sad. But if you really want to know what I think about engineering management, you should check out my Twitter. So this is my most popular tweet of all time, and it has to do with engineering management, so I'll give you all a second to read this one. All right, I hear a couple of chuckles, so I can see people can relate to this. As an engineering manager, you're expected to do a lot of things, but you really only have time for a few. So you got to spend a lot of time prioritizing. And then another favorite tweet of mine. I laughed when I wrote this one, so I was kind of disappointed it didn't get more likes. In terms of surprise boss levels, try speaking in front of the CPO with 3 days notice, 2 of those days being the weekend. That was a surprise boss level for me. So those are some of the challenges you might face as an engineering manager, especially a first-time one. But there's some pros, too. You might get some cool stuff in the mail, like Lara Hogan's Resilient Management. I know there's been a couple of references to this earlier. You might get to build out your own team, like an entire team, which I also got to do, which is amazing. Promoting people is one of the most exciting things and rewarding things that you'll do as a manager. You also get to learn from and collaborate across the entire company when you become a manager. And then you also get to solve a lot of integrated team problems. My favorite is you get to set meal budgets. I love free food. And now I'm actually managing cloud engineers. Who would have thought? So quick photos of my team getting happy, doing some fun stuff like Allison had pointed out yesterday. We're making candles, we're having dinner, we're hanging out at an offsite in Philadelphia. And it makes me so happy to see my team happy as well. And if you want to know more about what it's like to manage at CrowdStrike, you can check out a blog post. We have a series of blog posts called 5 Questions. And there's one from me where I talk about what it's like to manage in my first year of management at CrowdStrike. And speaking of, I just want to give a big shout out to CrowdStrike and say thank you for taking a chance on me. I'm an engineering manager now, and I've been there for 2 years, so I guess I'm doing an okay job. And that's all I've got for you. Thank you.